I like to just make sure you know where I stand on torture. It doesn't work, okay? General Kimmons, the day that George Bush, the September 6th of 2006, when George Bush started bragging about enhanced interrogation techniques, okay? Let me say a word about enhanced interrogation techniques. My friends, did you know that that's a literal, that's a direct translation of verschärfte Vernehmung in the Gestapo handbook? Verschärfte is enhanced, Vernehmung is interrogation. And the same methods, most of the same methods were listed in the Gestapo handbook. Anyhow, the same day that Bush announced that these enhanced interrogation techniques would be used, General Kimmons, the head of Army Intelligence, a 3-star, preempted him. And across the river from the White House at the Pentagon, he held his conference at 10 o'clock in the morning, knowing that George Bush would be going at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And what Kimmons said was this: no good intelligence has ever come from harsh, abusive interrogation techniques. I think history has shown that, and the experience of the last 5 years, hard years, also shows that, period, end quote. That's enough for me. You know, what are you going to believe? The Army general and head of intelligence who actually made his career on interrogation techniques, or George W. Bush? Now, that didn't get much play in the Washington Post, the New York Times, did it? But that's what, now, I have to make, a full breast of the truth here. There is one situation where torture works like a charm, okay? Kimmons says, General Kimmons, that no reliable intelligence has ever been gotten through torture, but, you know, if you want unreliable information, man, torture works like a charm, okay? If you want to prove, as they did for the first 6 months after the bombing started of Iraq, if you want to prove that there were Al-Qaeda representatives going up for training under Saddam Hussein's regime, man, they just snatch one of these Libyans who was in charge of their, the travel bureau, okay? Bring him to, and try to get him to confess that yes, he approved all the travel of these people to be trained in WMD and explosives and everything else, okay? The guy's name was Alibi. We couldn't quite do it. But we gave him to the Egyptians. And the Egyptians have more experience in this kind of thing. And they got him to confess to this. And within 2 days, the President of the United States was bellowing about how Saddam Hussein was clearly training Al-Qaeda. That was October 7th, folks. October 10th and 11th, our Congress was duped into voting for a war that Nuremberg defined as a war of aggression. So that's the caveat, folks. Torture can work if you want unreliable information and if you use the kind of techniques that were used. Now, the President was talking about Guantanamo earlier this week, and I happened to hear him on the radio. I was traveling somewhere, but I copied down what he said. And it was really quite amazing, because what he said was, he really said that it's really kind of detrimental to our security that we would have 166 people still in Guantanamo, most of whom have been cleared for release, and isn't that embarrassing? And he said this, quote, well, actually this is a Wall Street Journal report the next day. Obama used the rhetoric of a rookie ACLU lawyer. Okay, quote, this is what the Wall Street Journal quotes Obama as saying, the idea we would still maintain forever a group of individuals who have not been tried, that's not who we are. That's contrary to who we are. It's also contrary to our interests, and it needs to stop. Note the passive voice. Now, so that's Guantanamo and torture. Let's change the scene here. Let's say Obama was asked to address drones. We're going to talk a little about drones. The idea that we would maintain lists of people, of individuals who have not been tried, but are on a list to be killed by drones, well, that apparently is who we are. It seemed to be in our interests, and it doesn't need to stop because it's just going real great, you know? Give me a break. What about the Constitution? This fellow is supposed to be a constitutional lawyer? My brother, the lawyer, says, you know, I wonder the Constitution of which country he's an expert in, you know? It doesn't seem to be the Constitution of the United States. So drones, it comes out, actually within the past week, from the lawyer who was in the White House at the time and subsequently in the State Department. They're a substitute. We don't want to have any more people to bring to Guantanamo. That's embarrassing. The president himself says that's not who we are, it's contrary to our interests. So obviously, it's a lot easier just to kill them, you know? And actually, we have very, very accurate missiles that we can do that with. Now people say, are these missiles as accurate as everyone says? And I say, yeah, they are. Yeah, these Hellfire missiles are really, really accurate. But the problem is, the target information is notoriously inaccurate. Where do they get the target information? They have few people on the ground. Well, somebody has a vendetta against his neighbor. He accepts a little homing device, puts it in his neighbor's house, goes out to eat for the evening, and his neighbor's not a problem anymore. It's that kind of thing. It's notoriously, and for John Brennan, who's now head of the CIA, to say that over a period of a year, no civilian, no collateral damage was occurred, you know, that's ludicrous on his face, and even the press left him to scorn on that one. So why do we use drones? Well, none of the people running the drones get killed. Nobody sees the casualties. If they're women and children, well, we deny it for as long as that's possible, and then when somebody runs pictures in the Pakistani press, we say, well, they're doctored or something like that. But drones are just a, you know, method of convenience. And you know, in the long run, it ain't gonna work because everyone will have drones. And drones can be shot down. And you know, anybody can run a drone. It doesn't even have to be a government. So the precedent that we're setting there is a really noxious one, and it's going to come back to bite us. Besides, it's a pretty cowardly thing. You know, I'm an Army officer, so I've always been sort of critical of these blue-suited guys who go bomb things without much risk and, you know, think they can win a war that way. It never happened, okay? But drones, that makes it even worse. And why is it that a lot of the drone operators are having PTSD? Why are the chaplains in great supply at these bases where they sit at these playstations and kill people? Because those kids have a conscience. And that's a good thing. And that conscience should bother them. You know, if they go home to dinner after 6 or 8 hours on the console, and they know that last week some of these drones killed 60 kids or 60 civilians, and they don't know what their commendable activity the previous day really caused, and that's a problem. It should be a problem, and it needs to stop. The other thing that I was asked to touch on has to do with something related, and that's cyber warfare. Now, I put drones and cyber warfare in the same kind of category because, you know, if you look at U.S. military might and, you know, the fact that we have the most sophisticated and the most potent military force, well, that's due to all the money that we put into it and all the technology and all this stuff. But cyber warfare and drones are relatively cheap to produce, so any country can get a whole bunch of drones. Israel sells them by the bushelful, so to speak, okay? And how about cyber warfare? Well, I'm a novice at all this, but I did talk to some of you folks about this earlier. And it seems to me that once you start using cyber in a warlike manner, which we in Israel did with the Stuxnet, trying to mess around with the Iranian nuclear facilities, once you do that, then you're starting something that you really don't have much control over. And the noxious thing in my view is that, you know, we have a lot of bright young people that can do all this cyber stuff, but so do the Chinese. You know, so do the Iranians. it's, in my view, a kind of playing field leveler, okay? No longer does the US have an advantage by spending as much as the rest of the world on defense. All you need is some really bright young people who know how to do this stuff, and I understand this is already being done. And so that's why the National Intelligence Director, in his testimony to Congress this year, said the biggest problem is cyber. It's the biggest problem we face. They can take down our financial network, they can take down all this other stuff. So what's the, you know, when these threats have arisen in the past, somebody has thought, well, you know, maybe we ought to talk to people about this. Maybe we ought to talk to the Russians, the Chinese. Maybe there's some way we can negotiate a sensible solution to this dilemma. People don't even think of that anymore. You know, it's never a topic of conversation. This is a really, really sensitive issue that should be brought up and discussed. So, cyber warfare is one of the banes of our existence, and will be. And you know, when I think about, you know, I understand here in Maine that we've got some legislation here that people tried to get more sensible. You know, like we have this Fourth Amendment, and you know, usually should require probable cause to go after or even surveil somebody. But apparently the Attorney General here said, well, probable cause, you know, we'll rely on the police to figure out probable cause, and armoring the drones, of course we can do that, and so we will do that. The blame in Maine lies mainly in those people, you know. Wow, you know, what's going on there? And it's not only the drones and this kind of stuff, but have you seen the videos taken out of the second floor story in Watertown, Massachusetts, of neighbors looking at what those guys did? You know, if you want, I have a 2-minute sort of thing. I think it's worth 1,000 words, like some images are. And if we can figure out how to do this, I think I'd like to do that. Yeah, that's it. Can we get it to full screen like we did before? This it's not a professional video, okay, but it shows what we're talking about. Okay, that'll give you enough of an idea, huh? How about the Fourth Amendment there? You know, in 2 years we will be celebrating, in one manner or another, the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, yeah. Now, will we be holding an inquest or funeral? Will we be writing articles that, well, yeah, there was this Magna Carta where these gutsy nobles wrested some powers from King John, but that was, that's old and that's obsolete because after 9/11, everything, complete the sentence for me, please, after 9/11, everything changed, you know. Now, I think one of the problems is that maybe the folks in Watertown will feel strongly about this, but that was an amateur video, as you can see. I came by it by accident. And none of us know how our civil liberties are being degraded or being just kind of written off. And little people really don't stand much of a chance. And I'm not talking only about little people abroad, I'm talking about little people here in this country. And let's just like to finish with one story. Maybe I can just, can you hear me back there? Yeah, okay. 2 years into the war in Iraq, there was an Iraqi woman engineer who came with several other Iraqi women professionals sponsored by Code Pink to do a tour and talk to Americans. And this woman's name was Faisa Al-Jarati. She was an engineer. She kept the part of the Baghdad water purification plants operating, okay? She had lost her son, he was kidnapped, and she had all kinds of other problems, and she was in our country to tell us what was going on. We went to several very progressive places on the West Coast. So at each place, when she came, you know, they'd clap, and when she talked, they would clap. And then in the discussion period, these very well-heeled and very intelligent, well-educated people say, yeah, but what can we do? You know, what can we do? You know, it's really too bad, but what can we do? And at one point, Faisa came down, she was sitting next to me, and she sat down next to me after speaking, and she had a pad, and she took my pad actually, and wrote, so American people seem to care about Iraqi people, but then they always say, but what can we do? How about my Iraqi people who are suffering and being attacked and wounded and so forth? Why do they always say, but what can we do? When I start this tour, I feel good about American welcome. But now all I hear is, what can we do? I feel sick. And she puts it right in front of me. That's what she wanted to say, right? She couldn't say that in a diplomatic way. Now, I'm not the first to get these things, but I do know from being together with people who feel the way a lot of us do, that it's good to check these things out. I knew this was a special moment, and so I immediately emailed back to the head of the Servant Leadership School, the co-director. I was another co-director, and I said, this rings a bell. Would you tell me what this means? I know it's important. Please tell me what it means. Now, Victoria wrote back and she said, Ray, don't you remember? Don't you remember when we did that racial course where that great big African-American instructor at one point lost his patience? He says, you know, I don't want to hear, when you've got your heel on my neck, I don't want to hear how sorry you are about having your heel on my neck or how you really wish that my neck wasn't down there. I want you to get the heel off my neck, thank you very much. And then he said, I remember this distinctly, he said, you people really, really kill me. He says, you say you can't do anything. And you're unwilling to even acknowledge that in your backpack, you've got all kinds of tools of white privilege, things that we don't have. Education. You've got money, more money than we have. You've got all kinds of opportunities that we lack. If you just take the damn backpack off and take out the contents and put them into play, we could change things. And I'm thinking, wow, yes, Victoria, that's what he said. And am I guilty? Are we all guilty of not being willing to not only stand by our principles, but suffer for principles? That's the literal meaning of compassion, okay? To suffer with. Are we willing to undergo some suffering so other people might not be subjected to drone strikes or be spied upon or have their homes violated? Well, 200 years ago, the guys that came from this part of our country were. And they gave us a constitution. And the people who live where I live now, Madison, George Mason, they constructed this constitution. And some of you may not know this, but Mason did most of the constructing, and when it came up to be finalized, he said, Jim Madison, Jim, I'm really sorry, but I can't sign this thing. And Madison said, you're kidding. And Mason said, no, I can't sign it because it doesn't have a Bill of Rights. It would violate my conscience to put a constitution into effect without a Bill of Rights. So Madison said, well, all right, I honor your opinion. Can you be quiet about it till we get this thing passed, okay? And I promise you, in those days promises meant something, I promise you I'll send horses up and down the eastern seaboard to get these 10 First Amendments ratified just as we had them in Virginia. And they did, and he did, and they were ratified, and Mason won that round, okay? Now, that's how strongly these guys felt about the Bill of Rights. And now we've had, the Fifth Amendment, talking about drones. What does the Fifth Amendment say? No person. Doesn't say no American. Doesn't say no citizen. It says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And that has always meant the involvement of the third branch of government. You remember your civics classes, 3 co-equal branches of government. Well, now what do? Well, Attorney General John Brennan, now at the CIA, Obama said, well, due process, that doesn't mean that the judiciary has to be involved. It doesn't say judicial process, so we do the due process right here. We do due process right here in the White House. Thank you very much. And what do? We keep the white knapsack on our back, and we don't risk our necks. What I'm trying to say is here that those of you who stand by your principles and really have a moral outlook on these things, well, that's great. But as Cesar Chavez used to say, op-eds are great, speeches are great, but without action, nothing's going to happen. And they always used to say to him, oh yeah, but there are not enough of us. And he'd say, yes, there are. There are enough of us. We just have to start where we can. So what are we to do about all this? I think that our founding fathers, Madison and George Mason, would really be horrified if we didn't do something more than speeches, something more than op-eds. Civil disobedience is something that people do who feel strongly enough to risk suffering for what their beliefs are. And there are people here who have gone to prison, myself included, for making a point that will not stand for extra-constitutional or non-constitutional behavior. Some of you took the same oath that I did as an Army officer to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What does that mean in this context? And what does it mean? I checked with the lawyers. That oath has no expiration date. And many of us, you don't have to be an officer in the Army, many of us have sworn that oath. So when we see the Fourth and the Fifth and several other amendments being just kind of discarded, made quaint and obsolete, then, we have a choice. We stand by our principles, or do we risk ourselves in an attempt to tell our co-citizens, this is really, really serious. Now, I have an opportunity to see people who have just recently come out of prison. Bruce Gagnon may be due there now because he feels really strongly about these drones and was up at Syracuse just last week, was arrested, and he's got to go back up there to be tried on the 7th of May. So people do stick out. And it was mentioned by one of these folks that I had a chance to debate Donald Rumsfeld. Well, that was exactly 7 years ago today. It was one of those wonderful coincidences where I happened to be in Atlanta at the same time he was. But as I sat there debating whether I'd go to the microphone, I'd seated myself two seats away from the microphone. I'm going, I got the goods on this guy. He's going to either lie in responding to me or not. But I don't know, it was very, it was a very white, male, defense-related, wealthy Southern think tank, okay? I was risking my neck. But you know what? I said to myself, what would Cindy Sheehan, what would Medea Benjamin of Code Pink, what would Colleen Rowley, they wouldn't be having this debate with themselves. They'd be up there right at the microphone speaking truth to power. And that, I said, what kind of wuss are you, McGovern? And then when I looked up there, so I had my four minutes of glory. You can, if you're interested, McGovern and Rumsfeld YouTube is still getting some hits. So this is just to say that, so to speak. So this is just to say that, we can take in all this stuff. We can see how our own troops are being brutalized. We can watch how Bradley Manning is being deprived of his rights, and we can feel very indignant about it. But if we don't follow Cesar Chavez's dictum, that, without action, nothing's going to happen, we're remiss. We're sort of, we're not living up to the pledge of our forefathers who pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to this enterprise. And as I look at it, this enterprise is in the gravest danger that I've seen it in the 70 years that I've been alive. And it's not as though we can't do something about it. Last thing I'll say is, when we decide to do something about it, we don't do it alone, right? We do it with a little group of poets or a little group of whatever. We get together once a week and we try to figure out what we can do. And then once we decide to do something, whether it's a little group like this or a big group like we had in the U.S. boat to Gaza, and then something comes out of that that's special. The synergy there creates something that no one would have been able to do by themselves. We do things, we decide to do them, we're supported in what we do, and we're held accountable. If we promise to do something, the next week when you get together, you say, well, how'd you do at the representative of the senator's office? Or how did you do up in Syracuse protesting drones? Now, the second thing and last thing I'll say is that we have to keep our sense of humor. One of my idols is Dan Berrigan, happened to be a Jesuit priest, and he did a lot of very effective protests against the Vietnam War. And one of the things he did was bang on nuclear submarines, like with big hammers, trying to convert swords into plowshares, okay? And one time he was on trial, and it was a really interesting trial, and finally the judge says, all right, Father Berrigan, if I don't send you to prison, would you promise me to stop banging on nuclear submarines? And Dan says, well, Your Honor, with all due respect, you're asking the wrong question. The judge says, all right, Father Berrigan, what's the right question? Well, the right question is, will you and others get Lyndon Johnson to stop building nuclear submarines? If you do, then I'll stop banging on them, and you and I can go fishing. He's just real comfortable, and we have to make sure that we afflict the comfortable, so that the comfortable do get afflicted. And I think that's our job. And we ought to rise to the occasion. If he says, afflict me, well, let's make our statements in a way that they can't be missed, and hopefully they can get some publicity.